Can you remember the first time you took a personality test or started to unravel the mysteries of your astrological natal chart? Because you probably felt witnessed. You suddenly were seen. It's almost as if your soul was scavenged from the darkness and delivered safely into your hands, or at least that's how most people feel when they start going into this kind of psychological space. But where has that journey taken you all these years later? Having worked with dozens of creative and alternative individuals in therapeutic space, I've noticed a concerning trend about most people who have a certain degree of fixation on astrology, human design, Enneagram, or the Myers-Briggs personality typology indicator. And it's three things. Bear with me, it's a very triggering video, but these three things I notice as a pattern: codependency, emotional dysregulation, and chronic low-level self-abandonment. And it's very interesting to step back because I've fallen into these patterns as well, but there's a real correlation between the personality typology fixator, or the astrology addict, and the love addict. There's a very similar emotional pattern of idealization and speculation and fantasy projection, except rather than it being locked onto the romantic partner, it's all directed towards the larger-than-life esoteric personality, or the ego, which is imbued in a new sense of identity because of the four letters which indicate that you are indeed an INFJ or an ENTP. Today I'm going to be talking about a very triggering pattern, and again, I am not going to discredit any particular system. I wouldn't read books like Carl Jung's personality theories or these astrology books, or go into any of these systems if I thought they were worthless, but I'm interested in putting them into their proper place. The reason I'm making this video is because I cannot make an honest video about astrology or typology or human design or Enneagram without drawing back to the grounded awareness of how these systems are typically abused and dislocate people from their earthly, grounded identity. We'll start with the theme of codependency and self-abandonment. Again, emotional dysregulation plays into this, but we'll lock in on codependency. By definition, codependency is when someone has, there's many definitions, but the primary definition is when someone has an overvalued degree of seeking or validation chasing based on the other, which means that they leave themselves. This is the man or the woman who is always attaching themselves to a particular man or woman, or maybe even an environment, to get a sense of self-worth. It's almost as if they do not exist unless there is an object, a person, a situation, or an environment which they can leach into and pour their sense of identity from. Of course, there's a lot of trauma behind this pattern. Very rarely will someone become an adult codependent or be enmeshed into an unhelpful relationship if they didn't have that pattern in childhood. I'm not trying to get on anybody's case, I'm just naming the pattern. How this relates to the astrology addict, which I'm going to use now for the rest of the video as the short-term phrase for Enneagram, human design, everything else. I'm just going to say astrology addict. It covers the whole territory. How this relates to the astrology addict is that somebody who's in that very interesting transitionary stage where they're starting to go deeper into their inner work, they're starting to reflect on the unseen mysteries of life. When they get that natal chart, I notice the pattern play out. It's the same over fixation on something, in this case, a theoretical system, which will give them a sense of identity to ground themselves, because they're not feeling too solid in their identity, in their flesh, in their mind, and in their spirit. What usually happens is a few weeks or a few months or maybe even a few years of becoming obsessed with sun, moon, and rising, asking all their friends to do the astrology natal chart on some kind of website, and then paying attention to all of the retrogrades and all of the moon cycles. For a period of time, this seems healing. It seems like it's almost a step beyond the chaos of not knowing what's happening, because you've got a structure of meaning to place the world into, and that's a key fixation of the codependent. The classic empath narcissist or codependent narcissist connection is that the narcissist typically has a very rule-bound, very structured way of living. So somebody who's a bit more chaotic and a bit more hypervigilant in the environment, they see that system. They don't judge the health or the unhealth. They see the system, they see the rigidity of those walls, and they feel comparatively safe. The astrology system is plugged in almost the same way at the subtle energetic level. I'm not discrediting astrology as a theory. I'm talking about the way that it's used for people who are healing. And this is the common pattern that I see again and again. Like the codependent who fixates on, let's say it's a male codependent who gets all of his love and all of his sense of identity and his sense of being okay in the world from the motherly figure who almost gives him the etheric teat to suck down and make sure that he's okay. He will then go to astrology and do the same thing, but he's going to do it through websites and do it through books because he's the same person relating to the outer object. And this is where we get to the theme of emotional dysregulation. Someone who has high highs and low lows owing to trauma of various degrees, owing to a lifestyle of too much stimulation, maybe too much substance, maybe too much time scrolling on the phone, maybe too much time watching wonderfully educational YouTube videos like this one, still in proportion. If you need to take a break, then please take a break. They all contribute to this feeling of very high highs, very low lows, very high highs, very low lows, and a feeling of confusion and almost a lack of control about where your moods go. Suddenly something shifts you off course. You're suddenly taken off balance because of what so-and-so said in the office, or what you saw online being hyper-triggering. Someone might even be very triggered at the idea that I'm attacking astrology, even though I've explicitly mentioned at least twice, if not 3 times in this video, that I'm not doing that. I'm trying to bring awareness to the pattern. I could even calm my energy down a little bit, try and make it as safe as I possibly could, but there would still be some people who are so dysregulated, unfortunately, that they can't see that I'm talking about this middle band, and they have to place me in either I hate astrology or I love astrology. And this is what you typically see in people, again, in those first few months or those first few years of getting into astrology or human design or Enneagram, where they see the world as hate and love. They see the system that has taken their fancy as the right system. They filter their decision making through the system, through the letters, through the placements, through the positions, because they are disconnected from the self-regulation that doesn't need something outside of themselves. That's the key idea. Someone who's grounded in their own identity and they have the ability to breathe and calm and influence their schedule on a weekly basis in a consistent manner, does not need to pay attention to what sign the moon's in or what's happening with Mercury to get their sense of safety. And if they're getting dysregulated, they're probably going to think, as their first thought, oh, I'm stressed right now. I think I need some fresh air. I think I need to go for a walk. I think it's been a little bit too long since I've eaten, or maybe I ate a little bit too much. They're not going to think it's Mercury in retrograde. They're not going to think, oh, it's because Mars is going direct against Uranus, or there's a square between 3 other planets. They're not going to make that instant connection, because that's going to a far out realm, I mean literally hundreds of thousands of miles away, rather than the presence of their own heart. You can draw influence from those systems, but if your default operating is going towards the almost godly position of astrology to filter your emotions through, you are off center. There's no way around it. Sure, there may be some genuine value to what the moon is doing in regards to human emotions and human behaviors. There are fascinating studies out there of looking at full moon cycles and seeing criminality rates. There's some really interesting books that I've got on my shelf, some very hippie books, I do admit, that show these 1970s, 1980s studies of criminality having like a 3%, 4% boost in terms of arrests every full moon, and also the same with heart attacks. It's almost as if the energy were swelling. I'm not discrediting the system, but that influence must be a lower degree of influence than the fact that you just overate, spent too long on your phone, or you're in a difficult relationship with a difficult person. It could be that the moon is doing something which is taking you on a journey that you don't want to go down, or maybe you just haven't got the discipline just yet to actually put healthy limits on your own highs and your own lows. You don't allow yourself to get overstimulated because you know when you're taking it too far, and you don't go into an apathetic shame spiral which is disproportionate to a behavior which really doesn't need to be punished or beaten up inside of yourself. That's the emotional dysregulation element. It doesn't matter which system you're going towards, if it's human design, Enneagram, or Myers-Briggs, if you're filtering your decision-making through any form of external theory, rather than listening to the truth of your body and getting in contact with your lack of breath, your lack of health, your lack of balance between muscularity and fat, your lack of balance between sitting and standing, between doing nothing and doing a lot, and you're not finding the balance and the rhythm in all these wonderful areas of your life, and you're looking all the way to the stars, or you're looking to a website that has a few different theories of who you might be at your core, you're not in balance. You're throwing yourself off balance because you're dislocating your attention towards something outside of you. And this comes to the final theme of the video, self-abandonment. We've touched upon it in the rest of the themes, the codependency and the emotional dysregulation. But self-abandonment tied with low self-esteem is really the pattern that I see at play. There's something about the person who falls in love with a theory, or falls in love with an idea, or falls in love even with a religion to an over-exaggerated degree that indicates that they are abandoning themselves for a truth which is beyond and supposedly better, greater, or more indicative about their life. And this traces all the way back, typically, not every time, but typically it traces all the way back to a strong mother or a strong father figure that was simultaneously scary, but also needing love. This is the strong father who was terrifying, but you had to do your best to make sure that you at least gave the impression of loving them so the abuse didn't get too far. This is the overbearing mother who was always intrusive and always had something to say about every single situation, and you had to play the game of, yes, whatever you say, you're holier than thou, or maybe it's even a religious situation where God is placed in this punitive, all-seeing eye of good and bad, and hell is just around the corner. These kinds of traumas tied in with the other themes of idealization and fantasy and projection of who I could be if I unlocked the secrets of my third house. That's all tied in to self-abandonment when you really pause to reflect on the pattern. I'm not saying that the system, I'm not saying that the theory itself is false. Again, high highs, low lows. I've just delivered something which might be confronting to someone, but I've gone through this myself. I know that when I get into a period of fixation or fascination on any particular theory, I've actually got next video is here ready to go. I've got a humanistic psychology book, I've got an interpersonal neurobiology book, and I've got an authentic movement, dance therapy, somatic therapy book. These are 3 different schools of thought, all relating to therapy. And if I allow myself to go deep on one topic, I maybe read 5 books in a row, my perceptual field gets so narrowed into filtering everything through the humanistic lens or the neurobiological lens that I lose the full picture. And that's what happens when you get too fixated on any particular personality system. You lose the full picture of yourself. You start filtering people through what their stars may say about them, and you lose the ability to connect heart to heart with people, and it goes into a very tricky territory where you've basically abandoned your core identity in the pursuit of what you believe to be your true identity, as defined by your numbers on a screen, or your placements on the chart, or your letters in 4 ways: INFJ, ENTJ, ESFP, whatever it is. Don't even know if it is an FP. INF. Yeah, there is. It's been a while. Got into it a long time. You can tell how much I don't use this stuff. Just some reflections. I've said what I need to say. It's up to you to decide if these patterns are your patterns, if you're noticing that you're fantasy fixated on who you might be based on a certain personality theory, in the same way that you would if you were addicted to a certain romantic partner or addicted to a substance. It might be time to just pull that back a little bit, and at the very least familiarize yourself with every typology system and see what happens when you notice the patterns in between, and make your own intellectual, discerning judgments coupled with your physical, emotional, embodied judgments, because you'll know the truth of who you are based on what's actually happening in the present moment, not what's happening when you locate your eyes through the screen and you get all heady because you got some kind of prophecy about who you might be in 30 years' time. It's useful, but it's not the full truth. And if it becomes the full truth, it's a false god. That's all I have to say. Next video on the topic, right over here, and we're going to be covering, I think, these videos. So if you want to know about transference and countertransference, that's what we're going to do. I'll see you over there.